Today, we're going to be taking a look at 10 niche Pokemon on the rise in Regulation G. So guys, for this video here, I really want to focus on Pokemon that didn't necessarily get too much use in the previous formats, that being obviously Regulation, E, F, and so on. But really, I do think have a very solid niche now that we have restricted Pokemon available in the game. And a lot of these Pokemon are generally here because they have really good matchups into some of the top restricted legendary Pokemon. And the first one we're going to be taking a look at here is Umbreon. Now, the reason for Umbreon being here is one, it is a very bulky dark type Pokemon, but it also has access to Inner Focus. Now, Inner Focus obviously is very important because of things like, Fake Out, of course, right? When you pair it up with Pokemon like Calyrex-Shadow, right, is a, a fantastic example, right? It's a Pokemon that kind of wants to be paired with Fake Out and then just gets to spam its, absolutely broken move in Astral Barrage, right? And not to mention, I do think Umbreon just naturally has a very good matchup into other top ones as well. It's pretty solid into Kyogre, very good into Terapagos as well. And of course, there are a couple other, restricted legendaries, especially those that rely on their special attack stat, or those with the big physical attack stat. Like really, I think the only one that probably doesn't have a great matchup to is probably Koraidon, right? And the main reason for that really is Foul Play plus Snarl. Now, these two moves here, I do think are fantastic. As we said, when you you look at some of these top threats in the metagame right now, right? We pull up the base stats you see, obviously Curums, they're not super relevant right now. Curum White obviously is a pretty decent one right now. Definitely doesn't want to get snarled down. Same with Terapagos, definitely doesn't want to eat the snarls. Zacian is probably another one that actually has a pretty solid matchup into it. But again, if it ever terrors, it really doesn't want to eat foul plays, especially if it is, trying to sit there and click, a Sword Dance or two. Going down the list, obviously Calyrex-Ice is a big one, right? It does not want to eat a foul play. Its attack stat is incredibly high, especially too if it ever does start getting going. Definitely doesn't want to eat a foul play. Of course, Calyrex-Shadow here doesn't want to eat a snarl, and so on and so forth, right? Ho-Oh doesn't want to eat a foul play. Lunala definitely doesn't want to eat either, right? The foul play will do a lot of damage, but so will the snarl. And again, it just goes on. Ray's another one that really doesn't want to eat it either, yeah. It's just a very, very bulky mon, has very good stats. Its defensive stats are very good, HP very, very solid. And honestly, it is just a good support Pokemon, right? It has a lot of other techs as well. I'm a big fan of things like, Moonlight obviously is really good if you want recovery on this Pokemon. But it also has access to a relatively slow taunt. It's obviously fast enough, going into things like a Moongus, which I do think is very, very solid. It also gets access to things like Yawn as well, which is obviously always really nice. The ability just to force your opponent to pivot around a bunch because they don't want to tank Yawns is always, pretty solid. But also gets access to things like Fake Tears and Helping Hand as well. I don't necessarily think Fake Tears is the best, but Helping Hand is definitely a very solid move on this Pokemon because, again, you pair it up with some really strong Pokemon, and you can kind of use it as a wall there, sit there, maybe throw leftovers on it. And you can just sit there, just being super duper annoying and just being super, super bulky, right? And when your defensive stats are this naturally good, honestly, you can invest a lot into either one, depending what your team needs a good matchup into. And of course, I think a Terra, obviously, that helps out into things like the Koraidon is always really, really solid. Something like Terra Fairy, even Terra Ghost, honestly, doesn't seem that bad. But yeah, I do think Umbreon is a really splashable mon right now. Obviously, it's not going to be an incredibly high usage mon, but definitely if your team has certain weaknesses, like for example, you just really need an answer to Calyrex-Shadow Rider, I do think Umbreon is definitely a cool mon that you can slap on the team. So the next one here, I'm actually a pretty big believer in is Garganacl. And again, this one I think is really good because of its matchup into the king of the current format, and that is Calyrex-Shadow Rider. Obviously, this is a Pokemon with pretty solid defensive stats, right? Very good HP, very good defense, and its Spadef isn't anything too crazy, but of course you can heavily invest into it, which is one of the beauties of a Pokemon like this, right? Your physical defense that is already so high that even if you max out your Spadef, it still doesn't even reach that. So you can even go for a Spadef boosting nature and just be really, really tanky. But the beautiful thing about it is Purifying Salt. Obviously, Ghost damage to this Pokemon deals half of the offensive stat, which means this Pokemon is very, very good at eating the psychic moves coming out of Calyrex-Shadow Rider. And of course, on top of that, it is also a Wide Guard Pokemon, which again, right now, Wide Guard is an incredibly strong move. If you have a Pokemon that can click Wide Guard for your team, honestly, it goes a very, very long way. You look at the metagame right now, obviously Caly-Ice, Caly-Shadow, two massive ones, right? They're out there clicking those spread moves. Of course, Groudon, Kyogre also getting involved in that. And of course, there's just other Pokemon out there, right? Fluttermane's clicking Dazzling Gleams and whatnot. Even Make It Rain, I have seen Golden Ghost still getting some pretty good results. Because of that, having Wide Guard is never a bad thing. And then, of course, we also have Salt Cure being its signature move. And having that extra, 1/4 damage on Steel and Water types, I do think is very good because there are quite a few, Steel types running around. We are seeing things like Zamazenta and Zacian both getting a little bit of play right now. And of course, there are just a couple other Steel types running around. The Gambits as well are kind of picking up. And Steel obviously is always just a pretty solid defensive terror. And of course, Water types like Kyogre, the Ogerpons, it's just very, very solid to have into it. All of those guys, of course. And yeah, so with these two here, it is like just a very, very solid mon. And then, of course, Garganacl does have a few other things it can do. Obviously, we have the Iron Defense Body Press set, which I do think is not necessarily the best right now. But again, when your defensive stat is this high, if you ever do get up that iron defense, the body press will start doing a lot of damage. And again, in the current metagame, it's actually pretty solid, right? If you go for a set like this with like lefties plus iron defense, body press, wide guard, and soul cure, you know, you can support the team one game, you can carry it the next. You know, it's very, very strong, right? And then of course as well, we have the other sets, which, you know, kind of just revolve around going for recover, right? Just be super annoying. I even think iron defense is honestly like solid on this set, right? If you go up against a physical attack, you just go iron defense, spam out your recovers, your wide guard, your soul cure, just be super annoying. It's really good. And honestly, right now, I'm actually kind of a big fan of Terra Ghost on this one. Obviously, Terra Ghost is really good into things like Koraidon, but of course, as well, having, you know, that immunity or the half damage to Ghost types, making it neutral is pretty solid. Because honestly, you're probably never going to really Terra this in front of something like a Calyrex-Shadow Rider. But yeah, the option's always there, especially if they're paired with something like Mienshao, right? Even things like Terra Ghost aren't too... Sorry, Terra Fairy isn't too bad. And I also don't mind the idea of like Terra Water as well, just as a neutral defensive typing. So the next one I want to talk about here, I'm actually a big fan of right now, and that is Grimmsnarl. Now, Grimmsnarl, I think, is incredibly good for one major reason. That is one, I shouldn't say one major reason, there's a couple major reasons. One, Urshifu's usage is slowly dropping down. Both forms of Urshi are not as highly used as they were, you know, previously. And by change, I still think Urshi Rapid is incredibly good right now. And Urshi Dark definitely has a couple really good matchups. But two, obviously, when you're playing with these big restricted Pokemon, they do tend to be the centerpiece of your strategy, especially when you are running just one restricted legendary, right? You know, when you're running like the Calyrex-Shadow Rider, the Terrapagos, it really does feel like the whole game plan is built around keeping this one mod alive. And one of the best ways to do that is setting up Light Screen and Reflect, of course, right? So very, very good moves when paired up with, you know, Grimmsnarl. And of course, Light Clay is just really good. Not to mention, it's a dark type into some of the top threats, which I do think is, again, very, very solid, right? This is a Pokemon that can sit in front of the Caly-Shadow, not care too much. It can also kind of sit in front of Terrapagos, doesn't care that much. Doesn't love being in front of Koraidon, but again, you get up the Reflect, and then you can look to Parting Shot out. And it's honestly not that bad, right? And then really good thing too with Grimmsnarl is its last slot, right? I do think obviously Spirit Break is probably still the optimal move, right? This one has a naturally really high, you know, physical attack stat, so it doesn't really need any investment for this to actually, you know, do some damage. And of course, getting that guaranteed, you know, special attack drop is always really nice. But I also think too, Sucker Punch is actually kind of a, you know, a niche tech that could actually do pretty decent right now. Even something like False Surrender honestly isn't too bad. Like, I am actually a fan of running a Dark Stab on this one, but it does feel kind of awkward to, you know, rely on Sucker Punch as your only damage. But regardless, I still think it's pretty solid. But yeah, right now, Grimmsnarl's ability just to protect your restricted legendaries, I do think is really good. Not to mention, it pairs incredibly well with Intimidate and Amoonguss, right? Like, parting shotting into an Amoonguss and then pivoting back out into a Grimmsnarl, it just feels really good. So, one of the biggest winners in this format was Mienshao, but I do think Hitmontop fills a very, very similar role. And honestly, in certain regards, it does it a bit better. Now, I do want to say, I think Mienshao is a better partner for Calyrex-Shadow Rider, right? Obviously, you know, it has the Fake Out, it has the Feint, it has the Wide Guard, you know, all moves that our good friend here has, right? You got Fake Out, Feint, Wide Guard, and Close Combat, right? Basically, the set there you're going to see on Mienshao. Hitmontop does the exact same thing. Obviously, it has the Intimidate, which can be very, very valuable. But of course, it does not have Inner Focus, which is the main thing Mienshao has going for it. Outside, of course, Mienshao having a lot more speed and a higher physical attack stat. But Hitmontop is very interesting for another reason. Now, one really cool tech I actually saw people running on, I believe an online tour, was the Iron Ball set with, I don't actually know what move they dropped. It may have been Feint, but they dropped it for coaching. And the really cool thing behind this is if we just go for like a Brave Nature, for example, and then we just go 0 speed here, with that Iron Ball, we go down to 33 speed, basically meaning we underspeed everything that you'd want to pair with this thing in Trick Room, right? And two of the main ones you'd really want to pair this with are things like Ursaluna, the regular Ursaluna form, but of course Calyrex-Ice, which I do think is really good, right? You have this support for the Caly-Ice, right? That has the Intimidate, it has the Fake Out, you know, enabling you to get off, you know, your Trick Rooms. And then of course you can spam Wide Guard if you need it. And then you also have Close Combat as well, which can kind of, you know, lean the Cali to potentially running something like High Horsepower instead of Close Combat. But of course, coaching is the big one, right? Raising the allies' attack and defense by one stage. When you're slower than a Pokemon like Calyrex-Shadow Rider, Calyrex-Ghost Rider, raising its attack stat, you know, by one is very, very solid. And of course, getting that defense boost on what is a Pokemon with a very, very high physical defense stat already is very, very good. And if you can position that, especially against some of these physical attacking teams, I do think it's really, really good. And again, while Hitmontop, I guess, isn't as splashable as Mienshao simply because of how good Mienshao is with Calyrex-Shadow Rider, I do think Hitmontop in most other situations is just better. It has the exact same kit. Sure, it's a little bit slower, but it has Intimidate, which is a massive, massive difference. So for our next friend here, I'm going to try to be a little quicker on this one because this is a Pokemon I've spoken about a lot in recent videos, but it is Ogerpon-Cornerstone, right? And I think Ogerpon-Cornerstone right now is probably the best Ogerpon when it comes to being paired with Trick Room. And the reason for that is sturdy, right? We're in a metagame where having redirection next to your Trick Room setter is very, very good. But you also want, I think you kind of want your redirection mon to obviously go down. But the biggest issue a lot of redirection mons can have is going down in one shot, right? You know, that's one of the issues that some of the other forms of the Ogerpons have is, you know, maybe if they're just going up against way too much offense where like a spread move, you know, plus whatever else can just pick it up, you know, or even just like a big single target, right? Say, you know, for example, a Calyrex going for like potentially a choice banded collision course, right? You know, you're just not going to be able to live it, right? But because you have sturdy, it allows you to eat that one attack, which I do think is very, very important, especially when it comes to getting up that Trick Room, right? You want to be able to live 2 attacks and then just die, right, with the follow me, which is obviously very, very good. And I think that's a big reason why I like sturdy in the current metagame. But of course, also it has, you know, big powerful attacks like Ivy Cudgel, even Horn Leech, Power Whip, you know, whatever it is. Don't run Woodhammer because sturdy, you don't want to break your sturdy. But of course, another cool tech I like for this one is Taunt. And again, I've spoken about this a lot, but when it comes to these Ogerpons on these teams, a lot of the time, especially when you're running with Trick Room, which again is what I'm kind of, you know, pairing it up with here, this mon's job is to die, right? Its job is to go in, redirect, and go down. Like, yeah, sure, it can deal damage in some games, but prolonging its life with things like Spiky Shield to me feels kind of pointless, right? Like, a lot of the time, this mon's job is there to die and give you a free switch into your Calyrex-Ice, to your Blood Moon Ursaluna, or whatever it is, right? And because of that, I'm a huge fan of Taunt, because this is a Pokemon where if you just max it out, go max, you've always got this really fast Taunt, which is really good into a lot of other Pokemon, right? Of course, obviously, it's nice into things like a Moongus, which you don't care that much for anyway, because you can just redirect it. But of course, you know, potentially stopping things like in Prism Trick Room is really good. Of course, things like Incineroar potentially from going for parting shots, especially if you lead Ogerpon next to a, what's it called, a Frigoraph, right? You can go for the, you know, the Taunt, stopping them from parting shotting out, which again is very, very important. And yeah, I just think it's a generally really good tech on Ogerpon right now, and I think Ogerpon should see a lot more play, especially on Trick Room teams going forward. Now, this next Pokemon here is actually a Pokemon I'm a big believer in, and that is Brute Bonnet. Now, I'm a big believer in Brute Bonnet for a couple of reasons, right? One, obviously it's a photosynthesis mon, meaning it is incredibly good when paired up with Sun Pokemon. 2, Kyogre is definitely on the rise right now. People have started realizing, hey, you know, despite what the haters say, Kyogre is still a really good mon. Rain is still a really good archetype, especially with some of the pieces it does have. You know, while it doesn't have too many pieces, unfortunately, the pieces it does have are really good. You know, Urshi Rapid's obviously good. Tornadus is good. You know, even Archaladon, you know, Amoonguss in the Rain, of course, as well, is really, really solid. But yeah, Brute Bonnet is a very, very good Pokemon into some of those mons, right? Obviously, it's a mon that can potentially, you know, eat a, you know, it can eat a Water Moon easily, move easily, sorry, coming off of a Urshifu Rapid Strike. And with its natural bulk as well, you can live things like a close combat. And you also have an incredibly high attack stat, which is very, very good because it allows you to go for things like Bullet Seed with a load of dice and just, you know, pick up one-shots and things like Kyogre, right? And again, being a grass type in the sun, it can also eat things like the water spouts really, really easily. But it also has access as well to Sucker Punch. And again, this attack stat is very, very good. Even if you go like uninvested, go like 20 plus adamant in this thing, you get that attack boost coming out, you know, buff out your HP, whatever, and then just kind of do whatever else you need from there. You know, you can deal a lot of damage with this Pokemon with a very, very little investment. And again, I still think you probably want to invest in this. It really comes down to how much speed you want to have on it, and how you kind of want to play it. But yeah, it can deal a lot of damage. And on top of that as well, it's just a good support Pokemon, right? It has access to things like Rage Powder. You know, it has a relatively fast Spore as well. And honestly, like, props to Game Freak for this one. This is like one of the, you know, the best misses we ever had. Look at this, man. Look at this. We were so close to getting Speed Boost to Spore, man. Like, could you imagine if they allowed this? 2 more points. And we would have got Speed Boost to Spores, which actually would have been kind of wild. But yeah, so shout out to Game Freak for that one. I thought I'd just throw it out there. But yeah, this is a Pokemon that has a lot of potential. And even then, like, look at that speed. 107 if you pair this with, like, you know, a Tailwind setter, right? Tornadus or whatever, Whimsicott, whatever it is you want to do. This one is still really, really fast. Even if you go for, like, a Jolly Nature. Like, yeah, sure, you're still going to get the attack boost, but, like, it's still really, really quick. Has a really good matchup into a lot of the top legends. And again, like, even, like, having Bullet Seed into, you know, Pokemon like the Terapagoses, I do think is really, really solid. Because, again, this is a Pokemon that kind of wants to click, you know, 1 or 2 Calm Minds. And yeah, Brute Bonnet can just kind of sit there and just deal massive damage. Of course, Sucker Punch is very nice. It's Calyrex-Shadow Rider. This can always be something like Crunch as well, which is obviously really, really good. And of course, this one does just have a lot of really good physical coverage as well, right? Obviously, we saw close combat there. But you look down the list, right? It gets close combat, right? Gets Body Press as well, which I don't think Body Press is buffed by... Actually, is Body Press buffed by this? This is a great question. Like, if I went something like... Where's Impush? If I went something like that, do I get the boost on Body Press? I think you do, right? Because it goes just based off what the stat is. So that's like really, really cool. Of course, things like Lash Out as well are really, really nice, especially with like ones like Incineroar running around. But yeah, I'm a big believer in Brute Bonnet. I think people will find a way to play this on Sun teams. And I will say as well, like, obviously you need Terra on this thing. I think Terrify is probably the best one. But yeah, like, I think its biggest issue is going to be the fact that next to Koraidon, they're both very Fairy weak, and you can't Terra both of them. But of course, you know, with Groudon, I do think it'll have a really cool place as well. Not to mention, it's also just good into things like Rillaboom as well. It can tank the hits, and then also fire back strong crunches. So, continuing on to another Paradox Dark type that I'm a very big believer in, and that is Iron Jugulis. Now, if you guys didn't see, Sableye VGC actually, I think a couple of days ago now, had a tournament where he used Iron Jugulis in Rain, and actually did pretty damn good with it. Now, I will say he did say in the video that it could have easily been in Tornadus, but regardless, I think Iron Jugulis has a really interesting place in the current metagame. One, it's a very fast Snarl spammer, right? You have a look at this speed stat here, you know, decent special attack. If you go for something like Timid Nature plus a booster energy, this mon is a very, very quick Snarl mon, which again, in the current metagame, Snarl is very, very good. Does this thing get knockoff? It does actually get knockoff as well, giving us some pretty nice utility there. It also is a Tailwind one as well, which I do think is really good. You know, I feel like the priority Tailwinds right now don't necessarily feel as good as they have in the past. But obviously they're still good. Whimsicott definitely is rising up, and Tornadus is still a solid mon. But I do think having like a booster Paradox like this with Tailwind is still really, really nice. And then of course it also has access to some, you know, Flying Stab as well with things like Air Slash, Hurricane, and whatnot. All of which are really, really good. But there are some other status moves I kind of want to talk about on this one that I do think actually have a pretty interesting niche, right? Obviously, it's a pretty quick Taunter, which is cool. But the one I really want to talk about here is actually Dragon Cheer. Now, I have seen a set where it was like Miraidon. I think it was like Miraidon. And then there was another dragon they paired with it. I don't think it was Raging Bolt. But was it a Terra Dragon one, maybe? I'm just trying to think what it was. There was like, I saw something where it was like Razor Fang or whatever it is, Razor Claw on this, and then there was like another Protomon. What is it? No, it's not Hadron Engine. What's this thing's ability? Quirk Drive, right? Yeah, Quirk Drive. Let's do that. Make it fast for myself. Is there a Dragon type here that I missed? There isn't. Okay, so it was like, I think someone played one of these Pokemon. I want to say it might have even been Iron Valiant. So they had the Razor Claw here, and then they had the other crit item here. So what is it? It's Razor Claw. Oh, Scope Lens. That's it. Scope Lens. So yeah, they had like Scope Lens, and they had Razor Claw, and then it was like Terra Dragon. And then the idea behind it was that you just have two Pokemon that always crit because of Dragon Cheer, right? Dragon Cheer, you know, raises a +2 if the ally's a Dragon type. You know, you go Dragon Cheer here, you have something like Scope Lens, bang, you +3. Same thing with Miraidon, right? You go to +3, and then all of a sudden you just start dropping like Draco Meteors, which are like buffed up, obviously, because you're in the train, getting up the Hadron Engine here. And then you always crit, so like it just doesn't matter. It's a really, really cool tech, man. I think Iron Jugulis has like a lot of really, you know, neat things it can do. I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see it get some more plays as the format develops. So the next one I want to touch on here is Ditto. Now, Ditto to me is a really, really interesting Pokemon, right? Obviously, what it does is very simple. For anyone who doesn't know, it's, you know, hidden ability here is Imposter. On switching, this Pokemon transforms into a Pokemon that it is facing. And basically, Imposter plus Choice Scarf is a very, very good set on it. I also have Theorycraft, potentially Iron Ball as well, if you have a really bad matchup into Trick Room. But I do think Choice Scarf is definitely the most consistent. And the reason why Ditto is so good in restricted formats, now, maybe not necessarily as good in the single restricted, because it does make it a bit harder to play. But of course, in a double restricted format, you essentially get 3 legendary Pokemon, right? Or 3 restricted Pokemon, right? I actually saw a funny meme on Twitter a couple weeks ago where it was like 2 people were playing Kyurem Ice teams, and they both had Dittos on the teams. And both the Dittos copied both the Kyurem Ices. So there was also Kyurem Whites. So there was just 4 Kyurem Whites on the board. I think 2 had Choice Specs, 2 had Choice Scarf, which I just thought was really, really funny. But yeah, that's basically Ditto's niche, right? Like you're in a metagame where you have all these big boys here. And it just comes in, you know, again, you have to position it correctly. That's one of the really hard things about Ditto is you always copy the Pokemon you're facing. So if you're in the left slot, you will copy the Pokemon adjacent to you and vice versa, right? If you're in the right slot, you copy, you know, the Pokemon on the right for you. But again, if you switch in on something like a Zacian, right? And the other cool thing about Ditto too is you actually keep the boost, right? So say your opponent sends in a Zacian, they get +1 attack because of, you know, the Intrepid Sword. You come in, you copy their Zacian, you copy their +1, and then you get Intrepid Sword, now you're a +2 Zacian. Really fucking cool, man. Really cool. I'm a huge fan of it. I think there's a lot of cool stuff it can do. Again, like, it's also pretty nice into Terrapagos, right? You come in, you steal the Terrapagos' you know, you come in and you just steal its, you know, its boost, which is pretty funny. And again, of course, there's a lot of other big ones here, right? Like, for example, you sack 2 monsters with Calyrex-Shadow, you send in your Ditto, you take their Calyrex-Shadow, you're a Choice Scarf Calyrex-Shadow with a +2 boost. I've cleaned up games with it. I was testing it out the other day. I would just I just give the Calyrex-Shadow 2 kills just so I could freely get the Ditto in across from it and then just win the game. Such a good Pokemon, man. Really, really good. And yeah, I think it has a really, really cool niche in the current metagame. Definitely not easy to play. It does, require quite a bit of positioning. In saying that, it does pair, in my opinion, very, very well with things like Incineroar. Slow pivot obviously is really, really good because the ability with, for example, Incineroar to just eat a hit, parting shot out, and then get the Ditto in safely, I do think is very, very important. Moving on here, we have, a bit of spider supremacy. Shout out to the homie Jonzu for this one. But it is Araquanid. Now, Araquanid is a pretty interesting Pokemon, right? For a couple of reasons, and really, I just think this mon's matchup into the current metagame is very, very good, right? Water Bug typing, while it is not naturally that great, I do think is pretty decent right now, and of course, its ability Water Bubble is just never bad, right? Basically doubling, the power coming out of your water attacks, and of course, while this is not a, this is not an attack stat to write home about, obviously doubling that up to 268 is pretty damn good, especially when you're firing off things like Stab Liquidation, but of course, this mon really wishes it got Wave Crash, kind of sad. But of course, this is a wide guard Pokemon. It is also a very slow Pokemon that does underspeed a lot of things in Trick Room. So I do think something like this on a Brave set is definitely really, really good. Because again, it helps you out into opposing Trick Room matchups. Leech Life is just a pretty solid stab move. And then whatever you want in the last slot is good, right? Pounce is obviously a pretty good, utility move. Of course, having things like Protect as well is never a bad option. And even things like Power Swap, your Power Split is also, potentially pretty cool, right? But really, I think what this mon thrives on, again, is its typing into the current metagame, paired up with its very interesting stat pool, right? Obviously, when you talk about things like Koraidon, right? This is a Pokemon that wants to click fighting type moves into you, you resist them, right? Sure, fire type moves in the sun are going to do a bit of damage, but this is a Pokemon that does naturally, a lot of the time, want to use something like Terra Water, right? You get, for example, Calyrex-Shadow Rider. 1, stupidly high special defense stat. 2, we're a wide guard Pokemon, right? Again, Calyrex-Ice, for example, right? You resist the Glacial Lance, or you also resist the close combat, and you also resist the high horsepowers, all of which obviously wants to expand out, right? Kyogre, you resist and have a very high special defense stat. Groudon, you resist. Your physical attack stat isn't all that. Sorry, physical defense stat isn't all that. But again, bulky enough where you can take a hit or two, especially if you pair it up with things, like, Fake Out, Intimidate, and whatnot. So definitely a very, very good one. Has a very good matchup into a lot of the top metagame mons. And again, its ability to just like come in and beat opposing Trick Room teams, I do think is very solid. And the final mon I want to talk about today is Smeargle. Now, Smeargle is a mon that I hate to see it getting results, but at the end of the day, it literally learns almost every move in the game. It's never going to be a bad Pokemon, right? You're always going to be able to find some use if you have to slap it on a team. Of course, Moody as well as a pretty broken ability. Really wish I didn't get that. But again, this mod, its move pool is so deep, and there's a lot of really cool things it can do, right? Of course, Fake Out is really good. Wide Guard is really good. And of course, Spore is really, really good. Rage Powder also is, pretty damn nice. I'm not gonna lie, it's got some pretty good moves there. Oh, but like, why go Rage Powder? Well, just go follow me, boys. We have the better version of it. Which is definitely cool. Amoonguss obviously is pretty good, so having like Terra Grass follow me solid. It's a very, very good focus Sash Pokemon. But another cool tech I have seen people running as well is they're pairing it up on Trick Room with Decorate. So you can go for things like Decorate here, of course, and you just start running like no speed. We'll just go Brave for the sake of this. Calc here. If you just go like no speed, you can always slap like an Iron Ball on this or something, and then just kind of max out its defenses, giving it a bit more bulk. That's not how you spell it. Oh my god. Iron Ball. Yeah, you just go something like Iron Ball, pair it with Moody, max out, the HP, put some investment into the defense, whatever it is you need to do. And then, yeah, you just start clicking Decorate on your broken-ass Pokemon. Like, again, like, you lead this, you click Fake Out, Calyrex just, sets up Trick Room, and then you just start decorating it, and all of a sudden, hey, it's +2, it's clicking, this big Glacial Lance. Hey, it's +4, it's clicking Glacial Lance. Oh, like, you got up Trick Room, I'm, like, sitting here with 36 speed, I'm just gonna Spore you, I'm gonna Spore you. It's just a really annoying mon, man. Like, it's always gonna have something. Look at this. It learns, like, 95% of the moves in the game, man. It's insane. It's honestly insane. And again, like, we talk about it, like, Fake Out right now, really good. We talk about Wide Guard being really good. Spore, obviously, is always broken. Like, Spore's just a broken move inherently. Like, 100% chance to always sleep your opponent is just great. And Decorate in the right situation, of course, is just, it's just a busted ability, man. Like, busted move. Like, honestly, Alcremie, like, if it wasn't, like, such an average one, like, look at this shit, man, Alcremie. Like, Alcremie is so close to greatness with this special defense stat, man. Like, if it just had better physical bulk, maybe it could have been special. Like, if it was just a little bit slower too, like, look at this, man. Like, look, it's so close to greatness, but unfortunately, it's just not quite there. But yeah, Smeargle on the other hand, always going to be a good mod, man, dude. It's just always going to be good. Smeargle is such an annoying one to deal with. But yeah, anyway, guys, that is it for my my list of 10 niche Pokemon. I guess let me know down below what you think. Let me know if you think I forgot anything as well. Like, obviously, it's one of those weird things with Pokemon like this where, you know, they all have a use, right? But they're not, you know, very, you know, high usage Pokemon, right? Like, there are other ones I originally was going to have on this list, guys, and of course, like Clefairy. But obviously with Wolf just playing Clefairy and getting a really good result, it felt a bit disingenuous. Even mons like Mienshao are a Pokemon where, yeah, maybe I could have put it on this list, but I've also been talking about them for the last 3 weeks now. So again, it feels kind of weird to, you know, kind of touch on them here. But yeah, I guess let me know what you guys think down below. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Jugulis. I think Brute Bonnet's really good. Grimmsnarl Screens to me is also really good. And honestly, Garganacl could be the most underrated Pokemon in the format right now. So yeah, I'm interested to see what you guys have to say. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.